Silence, poetry, and listening. A Barbarian Lunatic production.
to take the measure of the lubricant. That's what we are doing. And, there's a lot of talk about paradigm shift, what will it be, where will it come from, et cetera, et cetera. And people keep claiming they have it. But I don't think people realize, they have trivial paradigm shifts or mini paradigm shifts. The real paradigm shift that is being acted out in the 20th century is a return to the archaic notion of the primacy of spirit. And it was contacted first and most abstractly by quantum physics, where it was finally realized when all other intellectual avenues had been exhausted that particulate matter, conceived of as tiny billiard balls whizzing through empty space, was going to have to be replaced by a notion of fields, of interacting fields described probabilistically and not really localizable in the here and now kind of matrix that we are used to moving through. But they called the new concept of matter probabilistic or wave mechanical. It actually is not mechanical at all. Waves are not mechanical. Wave mechanical is a curiously bastardized kind of term which tries to have it both ways. But how many of us are quantum physicists, and how many of us who are actually have access to the instrumentalities that confirm these notions? So it emerged and is emerging there in other areas, such as abstract art and the effort by the precursors of abstract art, the pataphysicists, the Dadaists, and the surrealists, to introduce the notion of an animate and active unconscious. The notion of the unconscious is actually an effort to blur the notion of the point consciousness of the ego and to replace the model of the point consciousness of the ego with this more deployed and fuzzy notion of a gradation of awareness spreading out to the very earliest memories of animal organization, you see. But all of these intellectual efforts to launch the paradigm of spirit have been somewhat academic and removed from the ordinary experience of people. What is not removed from the ordinary experience of people is the availability of the psychedelic experience, conceived not as a kind of masturbation where the laboratory facilitates the experience through the production of historyless drugs absolutely empty of morphogenetic content, but through the acceptance of the fact that this generalized communication from nature is most excruciatingly focused and particularized in these information-bearing molecules that have been evolved over billions of years in the biosphere by the matrix of life itself for purposes of communication. All of life is really an ocean of communication, and this is now being understood even by the hard-nosed Darwinian evolutionary thinkers. It is really not all tooth and claw. It is not survival of the fittest. It is survival of those who can cooperate best with those around them of the same and different species. Well, the essence of coordinating cooperation is communication. And the essence of communication is the free flow of linguistic intent. We're all familiar, I'm sure, with the way in which ants regulate their behavior by the laying down of pheromones. And that seems quite exquisitely organized and coordinated and able to execute its intent and carry out its plans. But, have you noticed that the individual atoms of the human hive are no great shakes either in most cases? I'm speaking now to an intellectual elite, self-selected by being able to get yourselves here this evening to this kind of an event. But I'm sure you all are aware of the public opinion polls which show that the average high school graduate cannot locate Venezuela on a map. And similar things, believes that Hermann Goering served in the Nixon administration. As someone said, but he did. Only the spirit. So, coordination of communication is really what these psychedelic compounds are about. And once this is recognized, I think the role of the spirit as a transforming paradigm begins to come into focus. You see, it is not enough, and this is again another argument I have with the so-called mystical tradition. The intent of the mystical tradition seems to be to trigger the presence, the experience of the presence of the tremendum. But in fact, what is necessary is to be able to act in the presence of the tremendum, to execute behaviors based on the felt experience of the tremendum. And this you do not get. You get a strange quietude, a quiescence, a glorification of the hermitage and the monastery as being somehow concomitant with an awareness of the spirit. Nothing could be further from the truth. An awareness of the spirit carries with it an obligation to action. Obligation to action within the context of, and I say this as generously as possible, the hive, so that the appearance in modern times of the anthropological data and the pharmacological sophistication and the botanical sophistication to recognize the role of these psychedelic plants in the formation of human culture is extremely important. It seems to me it is the seminal event of the 20th century, toward which all the other things I mentioned, Freudian and Jungian psychology, modern art, nostalgia for the archaic, etc., point. And one can almost make the metaphor that we are approaching a new level of self-unfolding as a species, comparable to adolescence in the individual. What happens in adolescence is that the DNA reaches the place in its program where there is a symmetry break and a new set of messages begins to be sent, hormonal messages. You can think of them as pheromones within the body. That's what a hormone is. An organic catalyst within the body which suddenly shifts the focus of the individual from what Freud called the polymorphic perversity of the ego to the felt presence of the other, conceived in that case as a sexual partner. And sex, which had never before been an issue, or which had only very peripherally been an issue, suddenly becomes an absolute obsession. And pointing toward the attainment of syzygy with the mystery, fusion with the felt presence of the other in the form of early adolescent sexual experiences. Well, I have many times found myself saying to groups like this, what a tragedy that someone might go from birth think of someone going from birth to death without the sexual experience. These are completing and illuminating and transcendental dimensions of experience which one must have in order to fully claim the dimension of humanness. Now, in the process of culture recapitulating ontogeny and phylogeny, we have reached our childhood's end. And our childhood was the world of naive Newtonianism, Hamiltonian atomic systems, a place for everything and everything in its place. We have come to the end of that process. Now we must invite the presence of a greater mystery. And in the same way that though we enter into the sexual dimension of adolescence, we leave it some 50, 60, or 70 years later, depending on how lucky we are, still without a full understanding of what went on. I'm sure you've all seen the little sign that says, we grow too soon old and too late smart. Well, it applies to sex as well as to the psychedelic experience. Now, as a culture, we must come to grips with the fact that the world is not simple. In the same way that a 9-year-old must come to grips with the fact that the world is not simple, it is not as Mommy and Daddy said it was. There are tremendous vistas and abysses to be plunged, and ask your uncle and he will tell you that nobody knows what's going on in these areas. Ask a shaman and he will tell you that nobody has found the bedrock of the psychedelic experience. Nevertheless, this wish to live with a bedrock of experience is a kind of trivializing of the great mystery in which we find ourselves embedded. We would have a far more accurate and complete picture of reality if we were willing to live with the felt presence of the mystery. And the way to do this is to experience what these plant teachers are trying to say, what these planetarily manufactured information-bearing pheromonal molecules are trying to imbue into us. Now, shamans throughout history have short-circuited the fall. They are those who know. That's what gnosis is. It is privileged knowledge vouchsafed to the courageous. And the fact that we have fallen into a childish or a neurotic style of relating to being is nothing more than a statement about the inherent biases of our languages and our institutions. Many peoples have not, perhaps because they carried out their lives in the vastness of the tropical forests, where the force of nature cannot be denied. You see, had we stayed in the tropics, we probably would never have taken the fall into history. The fall into history is what happens when one moves into progressively more and more barren landscapes and substitutes for the input of organic nature the self-generated neurotic maps that are based on incomplete information. Now that cycle is being closed. I often think that the discovery of the New World and its subjugation, which was like the carrying out of the ultimate fantasies of the neurotic Judeo-Christian tradition, a world to plunder, ends very oddly with Gordon Wasson and Valentina Wasson in 1953 penetrating into the jungle highlands of Mexico and finding there something more astonishing than a flying saucer or an alien artifact. Finding there true heritage of the human species in the form of the intact mushroom psychedelic religion. Eros, lost since the dismemberment of Osiris, lost since Great Pan's death at the rise of the Christian era, but not dead, only sleeping. And now, through cultivation techniques and the propagation of ethnographic literature and the work of people like Metzner and Hoffman and Watson and Schultes, shoved directly in the path of the careening cultural juggernaut of Western civilization. This is why I've called the weekend Psychedelics Before and After History, because I see history, as I say, as a prodigal hiatus, a wandering in the desert of unknowing, a indulgence in an easily cured neurosis, if we will but take upon ourselves the personal responsibility for cultivating a relationship with the mystery. We have bought in so thoroughly to the notion of a hierarchy of information and a declension of truth from experts, whether they be politicians, priests, or scientists, that we have devalued ourselves as the primary instruments of our knowing. And this is why I think, among other reasons, why psychedelics are so repressed, why it is so important to society to keep them out of the hands not only of children and high schoolers and hedonistic experimentalists, but to keep them out of the hands of research psychologists, pharmacologists, and physiologists as well, because fully appreciated, they will explode the Newtonian, Einsteinian universe the way a stick of dynamite explodes a rotten apple. And in the process, the hierarchies of paternalism, scientism, and reductionism will just be completely swept away. And this is all going to happen, God willing, in our lifetimes. My faith is that if it doesn't happen, then the cultural momentum toward a lethal conclusion will continue into the ultimate catastrophe. And so that's why I am willing to address groups like this and seek to inspire psychologists and chemists and students of anthropology and culture to examine this, because I think we have wandered far from our birthright and trivialize the mystery of being in the process. And to recoup that mistake, we are going to have to become as little children in the face of the shamanic phenomenon and investigate it intellectually, experientially, linguistically, individually, and collectively. Only in that way will we be able to rescue the enterprise from its momentum toward catastrophe. Let's not forget that each one of us is here in this room because, what, 1,000 or 10,000 generations of thinking beings did not drop the ball. However tough it was, 9 times the glaciers have ground south from the poles in the last 150 years, 150,000 years. 9 times they have retreated. This planet has witnessed all kinds of catastrophes and century breaks, and still the trust, the implicit trust that the environment must have in us as the catalytic species, and we are the catalytic species. Everyone is worried about the impact of humankind on this planet, but let me tell you, before the pyramids ever rose, the impact of human beings on this planet was staggering. The sea able to carry the biosphere of this planet throughout the stellar system in which this solar system is embedded. And life has this atemporal sense of itself. The reason it tolerates the risk that we represent is because it is gambling on the hope that we represent. And the way to get aligned with that and to get in resonance with it is to clear the noise from the circuitry of communication. And the way you clear the noise from the circuitry of communication is by backing out of the garbage of profane culture, reductionism, linearity, all of these things, and abandoning the fall into history and returning to the garden. If we each do it, it will be fait accompli for the collectivity. If we all sit around waiting for it to come in the form of benevolent extraterrestrials or a religious conversion on the part of Reagan and Gorbachev, we will all go to hell in a handbasket together. So that is the stunningly central import of the botanical hallucinogens in the planetary ecosystem. And that is this evening's formal presentation as well. Thank you very much. As I understand it, there is tea and coffee downstairs. Let's take a 10-minute break, and then I will entertain vigorous and even hostile questioning by the audience. And here is the various sorts of propaganda that I mentioned earlier. Thank you very much. It's later than we think, so I'm not sure it was up to me to call this back together, but I will do so. I know there are people with questions. Before I take questions, I was handed an express mail package in the intermission. Robin Sylvan, who some of you may know as the former director of the Ojai Foundation, is now running something called the Fairhaven Mysteries Project in Bellingham, Washington. And Kat and I have agreed with him to do a 9-day pilgrimage in Hawaii this coming January at the Botanical Garden site there. And it's been named Volcano Orchid Mind. So if any of you, I don't have enough of these flyers for everyone to get one, but if any of you think you might wish to and can afford to spend 9 days with us in Hawaii next January, I'll just leave these out for interested parties. And if there aren't enough to go around, why share at least the informational contact with other people. Okay. Is there anybody burning to ask a question? Yes.
There's what are your views on some non-botanicals such as MDMA and ketamine, which are currently?
Well, I think I implied in the talk, I really as the longer I deal with this problem, the more strongly I feel about it. It began as a sort of a very gentle separating, and it's become more and more clear to me that and I guess I rely on Rupert Sheldrake to give me a basis for saying this. Drugs which come out of the laboratory have no history. They do not vibrate with millennia of usage or with being products of the natural environment. They are, as I implied in my lecture, somewhat onanistic. So I view them as drugs. And drugs do different things. Some drugs stimulate you, some depress you, some may even cause the release of personalistic extremely healthy people who want to go deeper into experience. I've tried the drugs that you mentioned. I've certainly found them interesting, but I could not imagine building a career around communicating with people about them. To my mind, what's interesting about them is the contrast with the informational depth of natural hallucinogens. I think the word drug applied across the board to MDMA, ketamine, and psilocybin, mescaline, and those kinds of things does great injustice to the natural compounds. There really should be a linguistic distinction made. So I try to speak of organic substances, or more specifically plants. I don't deny the worth or the efficacy of these laboratory compounds, but they are not planetarily evolved pheromones carrying the messages of Gaia. They are humanly constructed nanotechnological machines useful for intervening in the personalistic dynamics of the psyche. And AIDS as germ warfare. Well, I don't know anything. I certainly have noticed that within 10 years of the discovery of retroviruses, which the AIDS virus is, one of the dogmas of molecular biology was that there was never transcription from RNA to DNA. It was always from DNA to RNA. Then they discovered the so-called family of retroviruses. Within a very few years, 3 or something after that, AIDS appeared with its curious political selectivity. I mean, this is a drug which goes after homosexuals, people who shoot intravenous drugs, black people, and loose people. If it could have just somehow gotten the Tay-Sachs thing in there too, so it would have gotten Jews, I'm sure they would have really been pleased with themselves. If it is, in fact, a piece of political engineering, I don't know that it is, but I certainly notice its curious selectivity. If it is, you may be sure that this is a secret buried far deeper than anything having to do with Auschwitz or Watergate or anything else. You want to talk about a crime against humanity. This is a crime against humanity on a previously inconceivable scale. There's been a lot of speculation about this. Granted, some of it has emerged from East Bloc countries, but on the other hand, it's well documented that other bacteriological and chemical agents were tested in this very city in the 50s and 60s. Some of you may know the incidents that I'm referring to. So it's a possibility not to be ruled out, certainly. I said that you would be next.
Talk about psychedelic experience and contrast to like similar process municipal state or achieving life going through other nuclear my understanding, someone has been used
psilocybin affects the imagination. It is a stimulant to the imagination, and I don't really think that that is dissipated, or if it is dissipated, it's very slowly. Also, I'm not entirely convinced of the claim of the yogic schools that they can lock in these extraordinary states permanently. It seems to me that the shamans that I have had acquaintance with certainly are not abusers of these substances. On the other hand, they are regular users, and I think that it's fine that the insights are tested against the momentum of down reality. Yoga, most schools of yoga, in fact I believe all schools of yoga, can be traced back to the 2nd century, the yogic sutras of Patanjali. Well, Patanjali explicitly states that light-filled herbs, his phrase, light-filled herbs, are one of the legitimate paths to achieving these high states. Certainly, if you look at the Rig Vedas are a vast and enthusiastic paean of praise to something called Soma, which was greater than Indra, greater than the gods of the old Vedic pantheon. The central mystery of the Vedic citation, Gordon Watson has argued very persuasively that it was a mushroom of some sort. So I really believe that if we had a completely clear picture of the evolution of Indian culture, we would see that for some reason, open at this point in history and looking back at it only to speculation, an institution of botanical shamanism was transformed into the notion of a lineage and a secret teaching and a set of physiological practices. So the issue of permanence is a kind of an odd one. Obviously, once you are not always stoned if you take a hallucinogen, but I am living proof that you're never the same. So somewhere between always stoned and never the same is where one falls. Yes.
This grasp of verbal language. Is that one of your changes? I feel like
Different questions. No. I've thought about this a good deal because people keep bringing it up, and I find myself saying, that it synergizes command of language and so forth and so on. But the most honest answer I can give you is I was always glib. And in high school, we had a big forensics scene going in my high school where you had two choices. You could be in debate or extend. And I said, so what is debate? And they said, well, you stay after school and you make 3x5 cards on resolve that the General Association of Trades and Tariffs should admit the United States as a member. And I said, okay, so what is extend? And they said, you go in cold and you draw 3 topics out of a hat, and you have 3 minutes to choose one of them and prepare a 15-minute talk. And I said, I'll go with that. And I was very, very good at it. But as I grew up and went to Asia and wandered around as a freak, basically, I had no sense of myself as having great verbal facility. I discovered that really on the mushrooms, and if any of you, there's a book I can recommend that is excellent reading on the subjects we've been talking about. It's edited by Michael Harner, although he does not make a contribution other than to edit it. It's called Hallucinogens and Shamanism, and it contains about 9 articles on various plants with shamanic usage. Henry Munn, who is an anthropologist who has spent a lot of time in the Oaxacan highlands, has an article in there called The Mushrooms of Language. And he says, they catalyze language, they catalyze verbal facility. And we don't know what the basis of the well-documented traditions of oral poetizing that we find when we go back into the Western tradition. It still exists in rural Yugoslavia. We don't know what the factors were that created that. I think that most people who take plant hallucinogens are simply inspired to attempt to clean up their communication skills, because you do wish to communicate, and it's the stereotype view of the intoxicated mystic in our society is of an idiot, the inarticulate hippie, the guy who just says, well, man, it's like, in my experience, that is not what it is at all. They are an extremely potent catalyst for communication. Yes, the blonde woman in the back, and then
artificially created hallucinogen to program someone, even if maybe from one really good trip, to program them perhaps to change their whole outlook on life. Now, and I get the idea with what you're speaking of natural substances, you're bringing out something that's already in you, or allowing some consciousness that perhaps is attached. I'm speaking about introducing perhaps some foreign consciousness into your mind through chemical alteration.
you mean as in a control or in a psychoanalytic sense, like curing an addiction or an obsession?
Like everyone has an acid at one point, and I mean, even many years later, still sometimes having like flashbacks on it and wondering what perhaps might have been that well or what it was you.
Well, I think that the most complex phenomenon in our world is the human psyche, and one does occasionally meet people who are horrified by my position and say, I took LSD 25 years ago and it's taken me this long to get it back together, and even now I don't feel that together. To me, the psychedelic is responsible only in the sense that it gave an X-ray of the psyche to the ego, and the people who have been severely traumatized or abused or molested as children who have real problems are going to discover the breadth and depth of this traumatic material, and it may inhibit their ability to set themselves free and become great psychedelic explorers. I don't advocate this for everyone. In fact, I counsel people, and I don't always tell people they should go ahead with their plans if they're contemplating a psychedelic experience. Sometimes I tell them they need to do more reading or have more therapy, and sometimes I tell them they shouldn't do it at all. It's a calling. Shamanism is a calling, and in traditional societies, shamans pick and choose very carefully who they will take on as apprentices. So it's by no means a given that everyone is going to find these things to their taste. On the other hand, those who do find it to their taste will inculcate it into their lives very readily, and it will become very important to them, their self-definition and their psychology. combination of these drugs and hypnosis and that sort of thing. I have no doubt that it is the little bit that we see, that we are able to get declassified from CIA experiments in the 60s is hair-raising. I mean, they dreamed of people who would commit acts of violence or assassination and then completely forget that they had done it. Now, how far down the road with these kinds of programs they got, we don't know to this day. I am very careful about who and what I am around in a state of psychedelic awareness, because you do imprint these things, and that's why, in the same way that the shaman chooses his apprentice very carefully, the apprentice should be very aware of choosing the teacher very carefully.
Yeah, I've had some major experiences in the last week in terms of ego death, just a complete crushing of my psyche and my point of view, and then it come through into some brilliant light and really a very spiritual experience. And I'm only now starting to play with the mushrooms for that, for more of that experience. I wonder if you could relate if the mushrooms have the potential to have that painful aspect of the crushing and the ego death kind of experience. So far, I haven't had that kind of experience with the mushrooms.
Well, a very nice thing about the mushroom is that it's extremely tolerant of beginners. Nevertheless, downstream from those early experiences, you're dealing with, call it the overmind, the super ego. It will give you not what you want, but what you need, and it can be extremely painful. It can be extremely humbling. It can be terrifying. It seems to me, in the people I have known and in looking at my own trips that had that quality to them, it's always to the good. The ego is completely obsessed with control and wants everything to be ameliorated and presented in easily digestible increments and to proceed along an orderly program of unfoldment. And it isn't like that. It has its own weather, it has its own dynamics, and you're much more in the position of someone sailing alone in a small sailboat. You can check the weather very carefully, and this will give you an edge. Nevertheless, squalls can turn into great storms with astonishing rapidity, and yet then you're in a position to really learn. But the learning is not, the real intense learning is not necessarily painless. And I see people nodding their heads all over the room. It is not for the faint-hearted, it just simply is not for the faint-hearted. People talk about how there are no frontiers left, and we lead such coddled lives within this society and in our well-furnished apartments with our stacks of CDs and all this. Actually, it isn't true. You can turn your living room into the helm of Magellan's ship. It's simply that the great unexplored dimensions are internal and psychological, but no less dangerous for that. So it's a calling for the exploring spirit, someone who really wants that thrill. Yes?
Yes, if I understood you correctly, I thought you were saying that history is always bang. And I wonder if that's true, because I'm thinking of, say, the prophetic tradition, the idea of there's a meaning in history, that there's social injustice. I think it's on Martin Luther King, for instance, who sort of comes out of that tradition. Did I understand you correctly?
Not exactly. This is a distinction that Marciliana made in a book which was very important to me called The Myth of the Eternal Return, Cosmos and History, Myth of the Eternal Return. If you haven't read it, read it. It's a great book. And he simply set up these two terms, sacred and profane. And what he means is that sacred space is paradigmatic space. That means that it is ritualistic space. It is always involved with the repetition of an archetypal activity. He uses the Latin phrase in ilio tempore, which literally in English simply means in that time. But what it really refers to is the time before history. So the juxtaposition of sacred and profane is not a value judgment. It's simply a way of talking about two kinds of time. One that is cyclical and engaged in the ritual establishment of a kind of archetypal space, and the other that is linear and rational and proceeds from a beginning toward the future. No, obviously, history is studded with examples of great saintliness, great insight, great displays of compassion and understanding. So I didn't mean to imply that, and hope that I didn't. Yes.
Earlier, you made an excellent delineation between laboratory produced drugs and botanicals. The question is, are the effects of each of these two different on sublaws of income?
Well, something more that I could have said about that, a very practical argument for botanical drugs, especially ones with a history of shamanic usage, is simply that they have a history of human usage. That's where the market testing was done over thousands and thousands of years. If a compound is toxic or triggers psychosis or mutagenic or induces tumors, it will have been dropped long ago by human groups who experiment with these things. Something can come out of the laboratory and be psychoactive, elicit some change in the self-perception of psyche, and can have all kinds of unknown or potential side effects. So what I always say to people, if I can reconstruct it here, who ask this kind of a question is, there are three tests to apply to a compound that you're thinking of ingesting. First of all, does it have a history of shamanic usage? Does it come from plants? Plants are also biological systems like us. They cannot produce truly alien compounds. And thirdly, does it have a relationship to known human brain chemistry? And I usually say to people, if you get 2 out of 3 on this test, it's probably okay to go ahead. But if it fails 2 of the 3 or 3 of the 3, I would steer wide of it. A perfect example, and I don't want to dump on anybody's favorite drug, but just because I'm familiar with the literature, let me give an example. Ketamine. Ketamine is a fascinating experience. I had a lot of psychedelic experience under my belt before I came to ketamine, and I was amazed at what it does to psyche. However, there's a significant amount of literature which indicates that it can cause epileptic kindling. There is another significant body of literature which indicates that it depresses the immune system to such a degree that it has now been dropped from general surgery. It's even, I understand, being dropped from veterinary use because all these vets were reporting that a very large percentage of cat patients were not recovering from quite straightforward operations, being spayed and that sort of thing, And ketamine begins to look like the culprit in that. Well, now, if it didn't have that bad rap, I would be willing to grant that it was a very interesting compound, but I just, my immune system is very precious to me, and also I find the notion of epileptic kindling to make me very uncomfortable. So, in spite of the fact that the experience is quite interesting, I would go very slow with that. I certainly wouldn't settle into it as a lifestyle. So just to reiterate, does it come from a plant? That means that it is benign to life. Does it have a history of shamanic usage? That means that it is benign to human populations. And then this third thing, does it have an affinity with brain chemistry? Because, you see, the brain views a drug as an insult to it. The brain has what is called the blood-brain barrier, and behind that, many enzymatic mechanisms for degrading any foreign substance and turning it into harmless substrates. The perfect case example would be dimethyltryptamine. Dimethyltryptamine is without contest the most powerful hallucinogen known to me, and I've spent a while looking into the matter. Okay, it does occur in plants. It does have a history of human usage in the Amazon basin, but what is most astonishing about it is when you smoke it, within 7 to 12 minutes, you completely return to normal. Now, what is happening there is that the DMT is crossing the blood-brain barrier very rapidly, giving you a phenomenal psychedelic experience, and enzyme systems are locking on to these molecules and saying, I know what this is. I know how to deaminate, dealkylate this compound and quickly turn it into indole-acetic acid, which is a common excretory pathway for these kinds of compounds in the brain. So the speed with which DMT clears the human brain and returns you to normal is a very, very strong argument for its harmlessness. So if you take a drug and the next day you feel lousy and the next day you sort of feel okay, that's not a very good drug. That's an insult to the physical brain, and should not be done, because we're in this for the duration. This is a task of a lifetime, so we want compounds which are extremely effective in delivering the noetic experience, the plunge into the tremendum, but you also want to be able to race again another day, and that involves paying attention to these other factors. People who are contemplating this as an experiment or a lifestyle is dealing with psychedelics as a growth program. The first thing I say to people is make a trip to the library. A great deal is known about these things. Read the physiological literature, read the ethnographic literature, and assimilate that data so that you're not just going into blind. Take a little responsibility for what you're doing. I'm appalled at people who take 8 different kinds of drugs in an evening and tell me they have astonishing experiences. I'll bet they do. But that's not for the duration. You can't build a lifestyle on that kind of thing. What you want to do is have access into the dimension in a way that is clean and informed and ethical and intelligent. That's how these shamans in the Amazon do it. I was tremendously impressed by their authenticity, and by their awareness of these issues. These people are not naive, as so much of the ethnographic literature insists. They are extremists. is the model for doing this kind of exploratory work still?
Which crucial to me, I think everyone one version is you stand two positions, well, and any between two. The first one acknowledges that it's possible to transform yourself from investigating love to one, thereby saying that in the same way that you will be able to continue the effects of this master class as part of direction. To do that, you seem to start to that's involved with the social obviously, everyone is aware this whole body of anytime scripts can change from Indian tribes. Oh, yeah, that's what's not frequent. It's miles where they want to exist this body prophecy, which is a lot of people do so in just a second of a drug. How do you reconcile those two positions? Or in the sense of power, how do you reconcile having free will, changing the same? On the other hand, there's this space, there's these moments of quantum information which says you're going to come up with this stuff very soon. The short question is, having worked in the forest, which you're going to do.
Okay, what about these, as you so aptly put it, these end time scripts? The only one which is truly pessimistic is the fundamentalist interpretation of the Judeo-Christian appetite for apocalypse. That is a lethal script for the planet in which only 144,000 are saved. I agree and participate in the generation of these end time scripts, but what I always say is it's an ontological transformation of categories, not the toxification or explosion of the planet. That is a unique point of view claimed by these Christian groups, and I think to the degree that they do that, they place a heavy burden on the rest of us. It's bad enough that we have these nuclear arsenals and the capacity to destroy ourselves without having an explicitly stated death wish as a cultural ideal. So I will, it's a question of apocalypse or millennium, and I believe that it will be a millenarian unfolding beyond the end time, not a cessation of life and a general judgment and a consigning of 99.99% of us to eternal damnation. How do you avoid getting the willies? A lot of people do get the willies because when they are tripping and they come up against this end time stuff, I think that the only cure is to stick with it. I always think of Frank Herbert's excellent advice that he puts into the mouth of his character Muad'Dib in Dune. He says, when the fear comes, it comes like a great wind, and what you do is you simply clamp down and wait, and it will blow itself out. One of the first things a psychedelic
suicides like Reiniger and Seidel. Seidel's book, The Bewusstsein aus Verhängnis, and the work of the misogynist Reiniger bear the clear imprint of having been written by lovers of the great mother. They are fatally fascinated by her, and even in the futile resistance they put up, they are fulfilling their archetypal fate. The archetypal situation of the struggling and reluctant lover plays an important part in the psychology of suicide among modern neurotics, and also has a legitimate place in the psychology of puberty, of which the strugglers are the archetypal representatives. The negation, the self-denial, the Weltschmerz, the accumulated suicidal leanings of this period are all appropriate here, and so is the fascination, at once enticing and dangerous, which emanates from the female. The close of puberty is marked by the successful flight of the hero still, although the ego does not know it, the instrument of the Great Mother, and the boar that kills Adonis is, as it were, the Gorgon's tusk, become independent. But for all that, an ego that kills itself is more active, more independent and individual than the sad resignation of the languishing lover. In the separation of the male antagonist from the male-female Ouroboros, and in the splitting of the Great Mother into a good mother and a very destructive male consort, we can already discern a certain differentiation of consciousness and the breaking down of the archetype. This separation and the consequent emergence of the twin-brother conflict mark an important stage on the way to the final dissolution of the Ouroboros, separation of the world parents, and consolidation of ego consciousness. Once again, let us consider the primordial mythological images that portray this event. Just as the motif of the twins is a determining factor in the Egyptian myth of Osiris and Seth, and plays an equally decisive part in Canaanite mythology, where it appears as the struggle between Baal, Reusch, and Shaman, so we find it with personalistic variations in the Bible story of Jacob and Esau. It is interesting to note that there actually exists a pictorial representation of this group of twins, to which Albright has drawn attention. A cult stand of about the 12th century of Beth Shan, Palestine, shows a remarkable tableau in relief. A new goddess holds two doves in her arms, as she sits with legs apart to show her strength. Below her are two male deities with arms interlocked in side, with a dove at the feet of one of them. Toward them from below creeps a serpent, and from one side advances a lion. The struggle between snake and lion, a life and death struggle, has also been preserved in the much later Nicolaitan, and the meaning is the same. This religion, being patriarchal, introduced certain variations, but in the cult images of the bull sacrifice, we find below the bull the same two animals, snake and lion, symbolizing night and day, heaven and earth. The whole is flanked by the representatives of life and death, two groups of poles, one upraised, the other lower. The womb of the Great Mother in which the objects were originally contained appears here only in symbolic form. The crater, guarantor of rebirth, and the two animals are shown hastening toward. A masculine religion like Mithraism no longer tolerated direct representation of a female deity.
Okay. I think I'm just going to speak. I want to say nothing, but I think I just have to talk about something before I lose myself in one of these recording frenzies. And before I start, let me just set this up right. Because, right, I mean, what I have to explain to you, I think, is simply how I operate. What I do when I do it. Quite possibly also the reasons for me even doing it. Now give me a second before I'm setting this up. I have never done it in such a way But just to let you know how much somebody is struggling that is aware of, and now that's a strange thing to even consider talking about in this, right? To say it like Terence McKenna, this kind of, you know, I've been listening a lot to Terence. I'm just saying that there's nobody that I really trust in matters of psychedelic usage. And that means to say that there are people that I have been with that I would really think about whether or not I should ever okay, like never underestimate the powers of a pretender. And what I mean to say with this is that there are men that use others to nourish themselves. So if I consider myself as a friend to other people, then I also have to ask myself who I want to be friends with. Who do I want to give myself to? And, you know, what is my own reason for doing so? Now, what I have to say is that I have spent time with people that showed me over and over again that they were not who they said they were. Now, that's a very delicate place to find yourself in, simply because, I mean, do you know who you really are in the presence of others and then alone in your room? Like, what of the things that you say when you are with other people is really truly you? And what of the things that you say is actually other people? And that is, a lot of the relationships that I see are actually diseased by the wish to succeed and to be better than others. Now, I'm currently writing, or I'm in the process of writing, my newest book called Mentality of a Warrior. And of course, I'm aware of the fact that for me, YouTube, most of all, is certainly an advertising platform. It's something that I do to raise awareness for the work that I have been doing for numerous years. And numerous, you know, you may say, okay, when did he start? 2020, 2021. 2021, right? That's like my podcast started then. I wrote my first book, The Book of Fear, and then my journey started. And that was after a lifetime of experiences. So I was only introduced to psychedelics at the age of 26. And when I say psychedelics, I mean things like mushrooms, and I mean things like mustard, and I mean things like, basically anything. But there are certainly differences in the effect these things have. And if you want to understand what makes sense, then you have to start asking questions and finding answers. And I'm living here in a city, and people were telling me how violent it is here, because they were living in a world of violence within themselves. Their worldview is one of violence. And now the question is, ought I to challenge these ideas of violence? Because if somebody wants violence and I subject myself to such a person, then what would that mean to me specifically as an individual if, my subjecting myself to a person that wants to live in a world of violence, would that mean that we would become friends and we would change the world together and walk like hand in hand, like two brothers from another mother, as the saying goes? Or would he simply spend time with me and wait until he can betray me because, he never managed to overcome his hatred? And, I tried to engage with people that I would certainly call, kind of depressed. And what I have to say is that my subjecting myself to violent beings, not just men, but also women, I'm also talking about old people here, turned me into a more violent being, which is why I have chosen to spend time in isolation and only rarely give myself to the public. And that is simply to protect myself from all the hate and the rage, so I can focus on doing my job and trying to explain, where, people may be going wrong in their own lives. Because, if you spend time with people who are violent, then what you have to understand is the reason for their violence, which makes it so hard to simply say no to them. Because, everyone has a heart, and people try to act like they don't, because in order to connect and open your heart, you actually have to look inside. But if everything you have on the inside is like really painful stuff, then it may be too much to overcome on your own, which is why I simply said I want to give what I have to as many people as I can, because, and that's basically, some kind of research that I did. Can I spend time with people? Can I spend time with people? Oh shit. And then still do what I'm doing at the same time? And that means to say, can I be this kind of savior that I think people need in the presence of others? Or let's say, would it be better to simply retreat within and just do your work? And that's probably something you may say I have learned with my father, which is, to say the least, a difficult relationship between two human beings that, could not be more different in appearances and ideals for, life. And well, I have managed to get to a relationship that I would call healthy, which is a very strange position to find yourself in if most of your life you've been dealing with feelings of hatred and rage. And what I started to realize is that often the people that I felt great hatred towards were actually using me to project their own ideas of self-hatred onto themselves. So if I think I'm a piece of shit, I'm going to get people to treat me like a piece of shit because that's what I think, I am and what I deserve, I treat people like shit and people treat me like shit in return. And that's then what turns into a vicious cycle of, trying to repeat certain experiences because, that's what you think your life should be like. And so I meet women that I feel like would want to spend, time with me, okay? And I realized that if I would enter into this relationship, then what we would do is simply repeat what you think ought to happen, which is we get together, we kind of have sex, and then the relationship will end again, because that's what you want, you do not want a humble and meaningful relationship that turns into harmony in the end because of your own upbringing, because of what your parents have shown you, which is, certain forms of terror, certain forms of, emotional terror between men and women, one trying to control the other, or, saying one trying to control the other or pushing the other one away, right? So creating distance and then, exploding into a sexual frenzy. But the thing is that such a relationship is so toxic that after some time you will realize that you cannot maintain this for very long. Like, if only one person is really devoted to loving because that's what they think they deserve, and they know it in their heart that, they can have a better relationship than the ones they had before, then, at least someone starts taking responsibility for, his own wishes in life, which then means, of course, that he says, I like myself enough to seclude myself from people that just want to use me to prove to themselves that, men are terrible. I wanted to be with a woman that says, I don't know how you feel about me, but I really like you. And I'm willing to sacrifice basically the existence of sex in my life, because if I can't have sex with you, then I'm not going to have sex with anyone. And, that is, I believe, the real me. Because I have tried to uphold these images I have received from other men that were trying to portray this kind of a masculine image that wants nothing more than sex. But now we have to understand the relationship between women and men, because if a man wants to have sex, then maybe he just wants to give to a woman what she thinks she needs in order to feel better. And that's then the answer, because if you turn out to be basically some kind of a leapdog for women because you're reluctant to work with your desire to have sex and simply accept that, Sometimes it's simply better to learn how to give to yourself what you want a sexual partner to give to you. And what that would mean in the long run is that if you learn to give to yourself, but also remember to experiment with how much you can actually give to others, which is a fickle thing, because imagine you go to the streets and there is a real, like, heroin addict, and you start giving this heroin addict whatever you have, which is love, because you want the heroin addict to make you feel better, and make you feel loved because he's taken heroin. But how does he feel if he hasn't taken it? And then you just go there because maybe you want other drugs. That's the position I found myself in at times, that I went to people in order to smoke cannabis. And I think people started to pick up on it. There were people which okay, that's not really true, because I actually liked them. But, to what degree am I supposed to love another man? I want male relationships to be exclusively of a, this kind of a friendship nature. And I was never sure how far other men were willing to go with me, and if they would force themselves upon me, even though they have given me great advice. Which is a really strange thing, because if somebody tells me that I should be careful in the presence of others when I take psychedelic substances, because there are people that would just give you something so they can rape you. If somebody gives me such an advice, do I really have to be scared of him? And that is the challenge I face, because if somebody thinks, maybe I want to rape him, which I do not want, but he may still feel raped emotionally, which I think, sometimes you just have a really strong bond. And I think if you would be, okay, I have actually no idea. I have no idea, I'm not sure whether I should choose friendship or not. What I know is that people like Yogananda, for instance, they never wanted to have sex. Okay, then I have to face also the consequences, which is why, I will never have children then. And that's the problem, because now I feel this deep devotion to one woman, and I realize that if I just keep exchanging women for sex, then how am I ever supposed to, have my set complete that I want in my life as, this perfect place that I imagine and that I envision, where I say, this is what I need, or certainly this is something I would like to see in my own life, which is myself, in the presence of children, in a safe environment, with a woman. I was even thinking about the possibility of having several wives, because all the women that I met just wanted to create distance between us. And, that's the problem I'm facing, where I think, well, if there's not a single woman out there that wants to be with me, then maybe I should consider the fact that, all women want is just a casual relationship to a man. Just have sex and, then just do it by themselves. And, that is a dangerous philosophy for humanity, because if every man thinks like that, then you can imagine how many lonely women will be roaming around the surface of ordinary existence, alone with their children, isolated in their homes, afraid to, open up to anyone because every man that ever came just used them, raped them, and then just left them. And that's just something I cannot accept. Not because I'm some kind of goody two-shoes, but because I believe, if I can see myself in a woman, which is, there are no empaths. There are just people that open up to the possibility that we are all the same. Which is why I say, how can I treat a dog like, some kind of random animal, while animal is just a word? I see a dog and, I can see myself in the dog, like if I would be a dog, I could have, dog children, but I'm not a dog, which is why, there's a certain degree to which I can open up to a dog too. Such as there's a certain degree, there's no point in, what people do, like, it's a weird topic to talk about, but what's the point of bestiality? It's just stupid. It's just, to me, it's stupid because who do you think you are? Maybe you should just eat less meat. And so you realize there are so many factors, and every time I want to be silent, and I'm at home, and I think, what am I supposed to do? And then I have all these ideas in my head, and then I listen to a video, and the video said, I'm gonna go bouldering, on Saturday. And when I saw it, I actually felt like, was that completely honest? Was that the real me that says, that's what I want to do today? Or what, do I want to go and support somebody else's dream, or do I want to live my own dream? And that's a very important fact. So I only indulge myself in the works that help me to progress and to become who I think I'm supposed to be. And that then, of course, is the choice that I make, and that shows me who I truly am, because I'm not the guy who just goes to the boulder hall to have random sex. No. I'm the guy that says, I want to be in my own home, because if I imagine myself now as the weekend, and I'm alone, but now imagine there would be a woman here with a child, or 2 or 3, right? It's like super nice. Now if I go alone to the boulder hall, then I wouldn't be here in the presence of, whatever spirit wants to be here with me. And the law of attraction then says, if you, let's say, sacrifice, right? If you sacrifice something for something else, then whatever this something else is, may feel attracted to you. And I am in the process of attracting a woman into my own life that I find is, the perfect companion for, the story that I'm trying to tell here, which is just, well, what is the story that I'm trying to tell here? I think the story that I'm trying to tell here is, I'm a human being and I have feelings. I have emotions and I struggle, but I do what I like. And because I do what I like, I can go to other people and I can spend time with them, and I can leave something in their presence that nobody else can manage to give them. Now, that is, of course, also a very, 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 that's like talking from a really high horse. Because if I think that, think of Jesus, okay? Think of Jesus. I saw a t-shirt that I think would like to have, but I'm not sure what the presence of this t-shirt in my, repertoire would actually do to, what I'm trying to create here. Because I have realized that choices determine the shape of your own life, which means that You know, if I choose isolation, then that's what I'm gonna get. And the t-shirt said, you know, it's like this image of Jesus around this table thing, the round table, and then what it says is, you know, Jesus like sitting there, but he's holding the hand of a woman, and on the left side there's people that are in conversation, and on the right side there's people in conversation. And what the image says is, you know, you can't chill or you can't hang with us. And I said, you know, okay, I think that is part of my own life. As sad as I may find it, you know, as sad as, you know, I may find this, I can also find it liberating, because I have seen myself, you know, and that's a careful point to talk from, as some kind of representative of the ideals that Jesus was advocating, which is certainly vegetarianism, and which is certainly a lifestyle that you know what I mean? A lifestyle that consists of, you know, also isolation. I mean, he was the guy that went alone into the desert. But what's the desert? It's the desert of his own self, which means the desert of his own self, you know. So what this means is that if you learn to live in isolation, then you will possibly experience what it means like to be free of the need to spend time with anyone but yourself, because you yourself are enough. And that's then what you may call enoughness, or it's what you may call, you know, whatever you want to may call it. And that's a real challenge. And the reason it's a challenge is because we always feel like, you know, we need something or we need someone. And, you know, what I need or what I feel like I need is, you know, just one person that would want to spend her entire life with me. Which is why at the moment I simply say, you know, I think what I need is to stay alone at home and to accept the fact that whoever I think I was no longer exists. Which then means that if I'm in I think that's just it. I don't know, there's just always these sentences that I have in my mind. We may call them thoughts, or we may call them otherwise. But what they say is, I think it's better to go to bed. Which is when I say, I mean, who would say such a thing? Because if you've ever lived life and experienced what life really means, then why the heck would you ever consider going back to bed if, you know, what we are being represented with is a situation in which we can actually really learn how to connect. Which is why, you know, if I stand here and I talk, then you see, there are weird things and there are suggestions being made, right? Which is, of course, if you listen to this and you are stuck in the belief that, you know, you are alone and you are whoever you are, but that you simply want to... Okay, it's like this idea that you are alone in the universe and nothing you do really matters. Where I think, to me, that would be a tremendously important point to work with, because I believe that we all have a reason to exist. Like, there's something each and every one of us, you know, can do if he opens up to the possibility that, you know, he can do something, which is really weird, and I'm still not sure who says it's better to go to bed again. You know, because I've been in that position, and if I wouldn't have drunk a coffee and did what I did, you know, I wouldn't stand here and talk like this. So you may think, oh wow, you know, it's super easy, you know, what he does, like super easy. And then all I can say is, you know, it's really tough. And unless you manage to learn how to create your own space in which you feel comfortable, then you may never understand how I feel like and why I want to separate myself from the general public. Because to me, what the general public represents is a vicious collection of people that, you know, kind of want to prove to themselves that, you know, it's necessary to hate your own life. And if we talk about pestilence and these kind of things, you know, I think certain kinds of thinking are pestilence. And in order to talk like this, which is also a weird thing to admit, you know, I have just listened to Terence McKenna a lot. And because, you know, he's someone I can really learn from. And I have had people that were trying to take a bite out of me because they thought that I had something that they wanted. But, you know, when they took this, you know, when they really tried, you know, oh, how does he taste like? They had to realize, oh, wow, I think it's better for you to not do that anymore because, you know, and I've talked about the story that somebody once bit me in my finger because I was reluctant to allow them to control me. They wanted to control me because they felt like I was a threat to their own existence. Because if you keep holding on to these ideals that, you know, you are the only one that knows anything, then you may come to the realization that people will simply hate you. Because if you never listen to anyone, then how do you expect people to listen to you? And so the first thing that, you know, I needed to learn is how to listen, how to be quiet, because everybody is really sensitive these days. But I also have to say I like to talk. And when I'm with others, right, they don't want to hear me talk, which means that they then try to throttle me, try to shut me down. You know, they may manage to live through, you know, one conversation they have with me. But what about several weeks? I mean, why do you think I started to talk about all these things? Because I want to talk. And if you spend time in the presence of a talker, then you have to prepare, you know, for hearing things that he says. And that's then what people have to understand, that I'm not really interested in what anybody else has to say simply because I'm too far away for such ideas at the moment. Because I'm operating, or I feel like I'm operating, at a very high level, and I'm trying to get my own life together, and if I continue to spend time with a lot of other people that try to hone me into filling their homes with this kind of energy, then what I feel like is that I'm cheating my own dream. Because if I keep spending time inside the dream of other people, and that's where you already have to open up to the possibility that this is a shared dream. But what is a shared dream? Because whether or not this is a dream, it's still real to me. So what's the point of simply denying the presence of reality? Because, right, I mean, you cannot run away from this. You cannot run away from this, right? You just cannot run away from this. And people were trying to keep me away from this, which is the only thing that I ever really liked. But when they see me liking it, they kind of start to hate it because, why do you get to do this when I can only do that? And then you simply have to say, well, this may look really nice to you, right? But have you considered how it feels like when you are inside? I mean, right, if you would do what I'm doing, would you still consider this to be you? Because I certainly consider this to be myself. Why? Because I have looked deep and hard for this kind of thing. And that's the truth. I have looked really deep and really hard to find something that I like doing and that I can invest myself into because it simply motivates me to be as honest as I can towards myself. Which is why today I choose to be here and to do this, and even to break my so-called vow of silence for no other reason than, I choose to do this today instead of going to the Boulder Hall and feeding your own space. And that's then what I would call honest. Okay, I'm just tired of having sex. And I feel like if I continue to go to the Boulder Hall, or actually I want to have sex, and there's someone that I could have sex with, I assume, but I also realize that this is not actually what I want. Which is only half true, because everything's relative. So what I could certainly say is that I sacrifice my chance of having sex with random women to the possibility of being someone that I really want, being with someone that I really want to be with. And this is just myself. And this would be a woman that I have already met. So, what's the benefit for myself if I refuse myself what I feel like I want? Because the only honest thing that I can really do is just be true to the dream I have, which is I want to be alone with the woman that I chose. And I do not want to, sacrifice her to greedy people, because I have realized that, sometimes people are too vicious to be considered anything else but themselves. It's strange. Sometimes I'm not sure about the colors. For some reason, that's it. Maybe that's what I wanted. I wanted to be more cooling with myself. And sometimes what you have to do is you just have to look for colors and then you just let it go, because you feel like it's too much. And that's also the thing that I'm talking about. It's basically, yeah, sure, I could have sex now with all kinds of people, including the space that I'm in, nature, life. And yeah, what else? I mean, what is sex? So I would say what sex is for me is simply I just cannot fool myself anymore. Yes, I do like listening to others, but I also really enjoy listening to myself, because other people have to tell themselves what they want to know, and I tell myself what I want to know, and I try to act accordingly so that I can simply be myself in the presence of others by first figuring out who I am, what I mean to feel, what I mean to do, what I mean to be, and what I mean to think. And if I realize that, the presence of others is often a distraction of what I actually feel, think, and want to be, which is a family man. And if I get stuck in ideas of friendship, it's hard to have a family. And then all that's left behind in the end is basically a collection of people that just want casual relationships because they're afraid to open up. So to what degree can I sacrifice my own dream in order to be... Oh, I just did not. So I just never gave in to these things. And by these things, I mean... What? Of course. And by these things, I mean just having, because if you've already met who you think would be a perfect match, and I have had enough experience to figure out who I would like to be with, who is somebody that knows how to trust, that knows how to be in love together, which is why whoever she is, she needs to know how to be in love on her own. Because if she doesn't know how to be in love on her own, then how would we ever be in love together? Because if she's, people think I'm lying all the time. Because they can't understand how I feel about this, what I'm doing here. And so they assume that I must be lying about it, that I'm just greedy, that I have a giant ego, that I'm the most selfish one around. And it's really hard to explain something to a liar because everything he sees is lies. And that's the people that constantly send me these hypocritical emails or hypocritical things, where they want something from me, and I have to admit, I just don't want to give it anymore. And that's also why I struggle to actually give anyone really a second chance anymore. I was always really good at giving second chances and, screw up once, okay, let's just get back to it. But at one point you just say, you know what, I chose a woman, or maybe that woman chose me and I felt it, but what I think is that, what I realized, this woman also has to show to me, that she really wants it. I mean, not just wants it casually, but like really want it. And that's then where the problem is. There are men that have different opinions about relationships to men, right? That just need large groups to tell them how they feel about themselves, right? Because they feel inadequate. And that to me is a real nuisance because, I'm quite secure in myself because I have learned to digest emotions, and I have learned how to channel myself into my own dream. And I get it, at some point we all feel like we should take, a time out from our own dream, and it's also good because the dream may be, really hard or may feel really hard, but in truth, it's simply what you got. And if I think that I have to be who you think you need, then I decline yourself the right to be who you actually are, which may be not who you have shown me, but who you think I wanted to see because you wanted to spend time with me. And that then, to myself, is basically a symptom of dishonesty, and the inability to just give yourself, what you need because you think you're greater than everyone else. I mean, that's a very weird place to live in if you understand why I struggle to spend time with a lot of people, because I am literally insecure about their motives. I'm asking myself why they want to spend time with me, because I'm certainly starting to become more like a public figure. And right, so you can say, okay, he has a dream and other people are taking his dream away from him and try to turn it into something else. Some people like to play computer games and shoot others online, or gamble. And then I have to ask myself, do I want to, give myself to them if this is their kind of dream? If this is what they think they need, then do I want to give it to them? I think it's better sometimes to dial back a little and to accept that, you don't have to play with everyone. But at the same time, I feel like there also is the necessity to connect and to do something together that could help the community to thrive. So what I probably would have to do is accept that there are people, and that some people may only stay alive if I stay in contact with them, which is why the work with your childhood and your friends and, you know, spending time with people that you met and that to some degree you do like, however uncertain you may be. And I'm just saying, you know, just be careful with who you fight. Because there are people that fight really, really unfair. And I mean really unfair. And it's hard to say why. You know, I have tried to understand why people do the things that they do. And I think I may have failed because it's uncertain to me, the motives of other people. I don't know why people do what they do. Wow, this looks so washed out. I'm really, really uncertain why people do what they do, which is why if I spend time with you and I invest myself into this friendship and you turn out to be, I don't know, some kind of a crook, then how would I know who the real you is? And I'm not sure if we can agree upon anything ever. And that's, of course, still an honest endeavor, right? So that we can say, oh, wow. Okay, how far are we supposed to go? That's a very good question. I mean, it's a form of perception to see what can be accomplished in the presence of others, which means to say then, if we both want something, then how do we know, or how do we need to be in order to get this? That's a very good question. I'm not sure with who I'm supposed to be most of the time, because I do feel like people are threatening my own life, or maybe my own lies, because I'm not even sure how honest I am about anything. And maybe I am really dishonest, you know. Maybe I'm the most dishonest guy you will ever find. Because maybe I do hate what I'm doing. And maybe I do need to choose a different life. Not because I okay, what am I trying to say here? You see, every time you do something, you realize, you know, something was missing. And that's often the problem. I feel like something's missing, right? So I feel like, oh shit. Oh my God. Right, okay. So what I'm trying to say is, literally, I learned to stay away from women that wanted to use me to give themselves a better life. And in the same way, I started to stay away from men that wanted to use me to give themselves a better life, because maybe they had no money, but they thought I do, which may be true, because simply of what I do. But then the question, of course, is, am I willing to share any of that money with you? Because if I see what kind of a life you live until now, then why should I fund this kind of a life, if you know what I mean? You know, I have had people that just talked about money because they possibly assumed that I have it. But the truth is, you know, I may have it, but only for certain things. And at the moment, what I have is simply what other people, or I think it will remain like this, you know, I have what other people have been giving to me. And, you know, this is a very humble state of existence, because it sets me apart from most people. Because most people, they choose a profession that says, I want to have money, right? So they study something that's going to give them money because that's what they think they should have to look really good in the presence of others. You know, I've got the best job, I've got the best wife, you know, I've got the best whatever. But then, you know, what's best? You know what I mean? I mean, what's best? I mean, what's better? The question is, can you handle it or not? Because if you were trying to live my life, you would probably have to realize that you cannot handle it, because it's my life. And because it's my life, you know, and I like my life, which is why I maintain a status of non-violence, which means to say, even in the presence of others, you know, I remain kind of passive. Sometimes I am passive-aggressive, you may say, simply to make sure that people do not try to overthrow me, because I have an intense kind of presence. And the solution to finding out who you are in the circumstances of your own life, like who are you in relation to everyone else, right? So I may think I'm scary, but what I've realized recently is that dogs are very careful with me. And other people started to be really careful with me, because I have shown them, which is probably something they needed for themselves, that I too can be aggressive, but that I always choose to be peaceful. Which is why, you know, if people are like really reluctant to give in to the idea that, you know, I simply want peace, then, I mean, what am I supposed to do with such people? Because if they just want to fight and fight and fight, and what I want is peace, then I think, you know, it's time to just go alone for a hike. Because nobody I met wanted to join me. And I just wanted to be alone on my throne, which is something I can understand. Which is why I also understand why my father wanted me out of the house. Because I had to make space for, you know, whatever else was supposed to happen. And I was just barring the harmony to a certain degree because of my own personal upbringing. So, right, it was kind of an exchange, if you will, an exchange of, different kinds of belief, that kind of formed themselves. Oh, it was already into you see, they always say, I think it's better to go back to bed. Who even thinks that? I mean, if there are things you can do which you like, then, how far are you willing to go to like them? And at the moment, I just feel like, yeah, I like hiking, but I'm not in the phase of my life where I just, want to hike all the time. Because I do a lot of hiking. I hike basically from A to B. I hike from A to B because, that's just how my life turned out to be, because that's the choices that I made. It's the choices that I make that clearly show who I am as an individual. But in order to stand here and to, there are people who are simply like snakes. There are people who are real snakes. And the question is of whether or not you can, find them. That's the real thing. I mean, that's the real deal. Can you figure out who in your life is simply pretending to be your friend or to be your wife or to be anything at all? Like, is that one of your abilities? Like, what is that thing that's trying to trap you into dealing with it? And then the question that will eventually arise is, are you willing to give in to this? Because there are people that live in the shadows, and somebody who brings a knife to a conversation is probably not a good companion. And I have had dealings with such beings where I wasn't sure, and I'm still not entirely sure, what they really wanted. What did the people that I spent time with really want with me? That's something I have trouble to distinguish, because some people, they just wanted a piece of me, and that's a very weird situation to find yourself in, simply because I don't get it, because my ideas are not so much about just money, but more about what to do with it. And that's simply what I realize. Sure, we need money, right? I get that. We all need money. It's not true. What we need is love. But money can be an expression of love, which is, of course, the principle of donations. So all I can say always is, if you love what I do, feel free to, donate if you like. That's just something I say because I feel like there's a relevance to what I'm doing. And what I learned is that, some people do things that are irrelevant to my own dream, because my dream is about peace. And also saying no to certain things, but also saying yes, which is then what frees me. I'm not sure